Hello, everyone. A very good evening, and welcome to this fireside chat from research to reality: how to build and scale a generative AI startup. This is an initiative under the GenAI Exchange Hackathon, which aims to use AI to unlock business and societal opportunities in India with support from Google, Meiti Startup Hub and Startup India. It brings together developers, enterprises, and ecosystem partners to empower participants with knowledge, tools, and mentorship. We want to thank Peak 15 for the valued partnership on this initiative. Let me introduce myself. I am Seema Rao. I'm from Google, and I lead our M&A and strategic investment efforts across India and Southeast Asia. We have with us today Rajan Anandan. He's part of Peak 15, and as part of the leadership team at Peak 15, Rajan is focusing on developing Surge into the world's top scale-up program for startups by acting as an investment advisor and mentor to the program's founders. Surge aims to engineer rapid early progress for startups by enabling disproportionate access to capital, talent, network, and decades of company building knowledge. Rajan's deep understanding of technology, operating expertise, and a track record of growing tech businesses across the region will help Surge's founders scale and build the businesses of tomorrow. Prior to Peak 15, as head of Google India and Southeast Asia, Rajan played a key role in expanding the region's internet ecosystem while accelerating Google's innovation and growth units. He's also a prolific angel investor who has backed a large number of successful startups at very early stages. Rajan also led Microsoft and Dell in India and was earlier a partner at McKinsey in Chicago. I've also had the privilege of working with him at Google. Welcome, Rajan. We're just checking if Rajan is able to hear us. All right, great. All right, so let's get started with this fireside chat. AI is transforming our lives in ways we have only started to comprehend. Google launched the GenAI Exchange Hackathon to help nurture the next generation of AI startups. So, Rajan, what do you see as the most promising areas for AI development in India, and which industries are most likely to benefit from AI advancements? Sorry, everyone, we'll just wait for Rajan to join back in. Please give us a minute.
Seema, can you hear me?
Right, we're back. Hi, Rajan, welcome.
Hi, hey, so sorry, Seema. So sorry, everyone. We're 9 minutes behind. Sorry about that. I don't know.
No worries.
StreamYard. I don't know what this is, but anyways.
Let's get the show off the road. So we're getting to a fireside chat, Rajan. And so the question to you: what do you see as the most promising areas for AI development in India, and which industries are most likely to benefit from AI advancements?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you, Seema, for hosting me. And it's great to be having this chat with you. Also, I hope that lots and lots of Indian developers and entrepreneurs will go through the Google AI Hackathon. Look, I think, if you think about it, there's sort of four levels of 4 or 5 layers to the AI stack, right? And at the chip level, we haven't really seen any innovation. I think over time we will. India has about 30 or so semiconductor companies. None of them are really working on AI chips yet. So I think that's some time to go. At the foundation model level, we've got a couple of companies, including Sarvam, we are early investors, Kutrim, and so on. But also again, there I think there'll be some there'll be some targeted plays, but we don't see a larger number of plays there simply given the capital requirements. So that then leaves the next two layers. I think AI tooling and infrastructure, we see quite a bit that can be done in India. I mean, just within the Peak 15 portfolio, we have about 30 AI companies. About 10 of them are actually in the AI tooling infrastructure space. Companies like Atlan in data cataloging governance, companies like True Foundry that is in the AI infrastructure space that helps large enterprises and so on. And then, we think that the largest number of companies will get built at the application layer. And the way we think about the application layer, Seema, is sort of in three categories or type of companies. There's consumer, prosumer type companies, companies like InVideo that that help YouTube creators create videos in 2 minutes instead of 3 or 4 hours. We think there'll be a large number of these consumer and prosumer AI apps, and we'd love to see more Indian entrepreneurs sort of focusing on that. The second is enterprise AI, so enterprise AI applications. So think about the usual, whether it's customer support, sales, marketing, HR, finance, and so on. And then finally, there's vertical AI, right? Like we think that in every industry, there are dozens of very large companies that will get built that are going after very specific aspects of using AI to either streamline like 10x or what I call sort of 10x automation. Or they'll start generally with sort of as co-pilots and then move to autopilot. So those are the broad spectrum of opportunities. I would so summarize by saying AI tooling infrastructure, we see a lot of opportunity, and then we see, quite frankly, infinite opportunity when it comes to applications. I think, but you have to be very thoughtful about which application you want to build. So that's sort of how we see it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is so wide, right? From the average, ordinary consumer all the way to enterprise, from domestic to sort of global, and then so much from an India perspective that we can actually offer in this field. Rajan, as an investor, like what are some of the top criteria you consider when evaluating an AI startup for investment? And in this new world of Gen AI, like has your investment criteria or guardrails changed for Gen AI, or are you applying the same sort of rule book as you would in any other, say, enterprise or B2C investment?
Yeah, I mean, look, fundamentally, we invest as Peak 15. Our firm is sort of seed through growth, right? So we can invest half a million, million, 2 million, 3 million, although we can invest 10 million or 50 million. So depending on the stage, we have different criteria that we use. But if you look at our seed, which is externally, the search platform where we invest up to 3 million per company, fundamentally the criteria don't change. Seema, at the end of the day, we want to partner with extraordinary founders who are trying to solve very big problems. So at that sense, 30% of the companies that we invest partner with, haven't written a single line of code. So that really hasn't changed. I do think when it comes to AI, so let's focus on the application layer, because that's where we think. I mean, even within our portfolio, that's where we have the largest number of companies, and where we are sort of looking the hardest, if you will, in India especially. I think the two or three things that are important. One, of course, the capabilities within the team, right? So now, to build great applications, you don't necessarily need to be, researchers from DeepMind or OpenAI, right? Which is what you would need if you're trying to do foundation model or frontier model work. Um, but you do need to have reasonably good AI capability just to make sure you're keeping in touch. You're keeping up to pace with the changes that are happening. At the model level and more broadly. But what we are really looking for is founders who deeply understand the domain, right? So let's say you're going to try to do something in healthcare. Do you understand sort of healthcare deeply? Do you understand what the pain points are? So that's on the founding team. And then in terms of the idea itself, we're looking for two things, right? One is we're saying, look, is this what they're trying to do? Is this going to be a 10x product to what is in the market today, right? So I'll tell you, like, the easiest way to comprehend this is, um, let's take InVideo, right? InVideo is a prosumer AI company. The type of YouTube, video creators that they target, it used to take them 3-4 hours to make a video. Now they can make it in 2 minutes, right? And they charge $20 per hour, $20 per month per user. And the company has gone from virtually launching the Gen AI app to $40 million. So basically 300 crores, sort of over 300 crores of revenue within a year, 1 year, right? 12 months. Why is that possible? Because, it's a 10x product, right? Like, same thing you can apply to healthcare, retail, financial services. In our next cohort of search, when we reveal, you'll see there's a bunch of companies that basically make certain aspects of work just 10x better, right? Something that used to take a team maybe 3 weeks to do, now they can get it done in 3 minutes, right? So that's a true 10x product. So we're trying to understand, is that possible, sort of thing. And then I'd say the other thing we're looking at from an idea standpoint is, over time, is this something where you can build some real moats? I think what we're learning is, especially in vertical, sort of what we call deep vertical applications, Seema, uh, if at the more customers you get, especially, let's say your enterprise or mid market or whatever, and therefore the more access to data that you get, your product should get dramatically better, right? So we're trying to sort of say, okay, so let's imagine. So by the way, I mean, there's no, at seed stage, no company has any moat. Okay, there's no moat. I mean, in fact, I just put out a video. I did a fireside chat with Arvind, who's the founder of Clean, also co-founded Rubrik. Right, I asked him this question. I mean, it's the fastest growing enterprise AI company outside of OpenAI right now, and the hyperscalers. And I asked him this question about, like, what are the moats, and he's like, "Look, there are no moats. There are no moats, right? I mean, you're starting up. There's no moats. You have no customers. You have no product." But the question really is then, as, let's say, 2 years or 3 years down the road, let's say you have tremendous sort of traction. What makes you sort of defensible at that point? So we asked that question, and I think increasingly I'm of the view that, companies that can go, number one, you got to have a 10x product. Number two, that 10x product needs to maintain that 10x advantage over time. And the way you do that is by just rapid growth, and therefore by not just mindless growth, but rapid growth, which gives you more access to data. Your products keep getting better, and so on and so forth. So probably the last thing I'd say is, we have this question that I started asking maybe about a year and a half ago, which is, are you going to, how is OpenAI roadkill companies, right? OpenAI's next version of the model, or the Gemini's next version of the model, or Claude, or whatever. Like, are you just going to get wiped out because it's going to make, like, literally, like, that 10x advantage that you had is no longer going to be there, because the model would have done it, and you haven't really done anything on top of it to make it very differentiated.
Yeah, so 10x product with a 10x advantage over a long time, maybe 10
Yeah,
years
10x
plus.
product that you can maintain a serious advantage over time. So you ask your question, look, these models are just going to keep getting better, right? The models will get
That's right.
10x better, they'll get 10x cheaper. So you sort of say, look, that is a given. Okay,
Given. Yeah.
let's just assume it's a given. Now, what will your product look like, and what will others be able to do, and are you still going to be able to sort of sustain your advantage?
Yeah. Just moving into now some of the sectors, and you talked a little bit about this when you mentioned in video. I mean, there have been some sectors that are early adopters, right? Be it video and images, content creation, and that side. And then we have seen some early traction in other sectors, be it education, some in health, and so on. But in your mind, like, what's the one or two industries or sectors which you believe is actually ripe from a Gen AI standpoint, but hasn't gotten enough attention yet? What would that be in your mind?
Yeah, look, I think it's very early everywhere, right? So actually, if you just take applications and you say there's consumer, enterprise, and vertical, I think we've probably seen the most amount of number of startups, right? Especially in the US. I mean, India, there's fewer startups than in the US, as you know, in AI. AI applications is probably in the enterprise, right? So customer support has probably seen the largest number of companies. Sales is seeing a fair bit of action, and so on and so forth. Um, but then if you look at sort of verticals, right? There are a bunch of attempts, right? There's maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 companies in healthcare, but healthcare is a multi-trillion dollar industry in the US. By the way, it's also important which market you focus on, right? Are you only focused on the India market? Are you focused on a global business? Because that impacts then, like how quickly can you build revenue scale and so on and so forth, right? Um, so I would say if you look at verticals, healthcare is going to every aspect of healthcare, especially U.S. healthcare, right, and global healthcare is going to get impacted most deeply. We think we have a bunch of healthcare companies that we really like in our portfolio, because in healthcare, as you know, Seema, it's going to impact everything from drug discovery all the way through actually care management within the hospitals or the clinics all the way through insurance, right? So the entire life cycle is going to be deeply impacted by different, by AI. Financial services. So we are very, very excited. In fact, in our next quarter surge, you'll see a super interesting company that is in a specific aspect of financial services. Okay, so if you just take BFSI, banking and financial services, again, multi-trillion dollar industry in the US, trillion dollar industry on a market cap basis in India. We see there's like literally hundreds of very specific applications, right, where you can have this 10x impact. So that would be probably another vertical. We think, like, for instance, IT services, right? India has IT services globally is a trillion and a half dollar type industry. India has $250 billion of exports. But if you look at different aspects of IT services, right, from application development, application management, infrastructure management, we think there are lots and lots of opportunities. So in fact, as we speak, we're talking very deeply with a bunch of entrepreneurs trying to use AI in different aspects of IT services. So I would say, like, and then even if you look at an industry like mining, Seema, right, like hardcore sort of like legacy, traditional industry. Some of the most interesting companies, like there are two or three companies around the world that are basically using AI to be able to much more accurately predict deposits of rare earth materials, right? So I think, look, this is not a one or two or three industry. It is going to have an impact on every industry that we know of, and I think the key is to really try to identify those specific areas that I was in the Bay Area, and we were talking to a company that is using voice in a very, very interesting way for the BPO industry, right? The BPO industry is $350 billion, and is going to be dramatically impacted because voice automation is sort of a given right now, and these guys have developed some really, really interesting technology with very low latency that makes the call center agent in a BPO much more productive. So you have everything from sort of make the call center agent call center productive all the way through sort of an autonomous agent, right? So you think about what that can do to an industry which is $350 billion of revenue globally. It's quite remarkable. So I would say, look, we don't really sort of say this is the one or two or three industries. We're saying every industry has potential, and that's why it's such an exciting opportunity for entrepreneurs in India and everywhere, really. And India has a real advantage, Seema. As you know, we have 7 million developers. Um, that's the most important skill when it comes to this sort of thing.
That's right. A lot of ideas. And then, yeah, I think as we go through that execution and scale up, that's where the likes of you, Rajan, contribute so much to this ecosystem. You touched upon like drug discovery, and that also brought in my mind like robotics, hardware. There's so much of application around AI, industrial AI, and so on. And I think over the years, I mean, we've obviously had the services wave, the software wave, the internet product wave, and so on. In your mind, like when it comes to sectors like semiconductors, robotics, like all of the chips, the frontier technology, the genetics, and do you think like where is that the next wave? Are we now embarking on that? Are all the stars aligned for India to now really start building the startups in those spaces, or what do you think needs to come together for us to really go up that journey and start to create the next set of companies that so far we haven't seen as much? And where do you think we are in this journey?
Yeah, I look at that wave. So the way we think about it, sort of non-AI deep tech, right? So semiconductors, defense, advanced manufacturing, biosciences, which includes sort of life sciences, human pharmaceuticals, like, but also looks industrial biotechnology, all the way through sort of quantum, right? So that has started, Seema. In fact, uh, let's take semiconductors, for instance, right? In our last cohort of search, we had two semiconductor companies, both out of IIT Madras, one called Mindgrove that does SoC, RISC-V chips in SoC, right? They launched the first Indian startup to get a tape out done. They just got a DLI, design linked incentive, for their second chip, which is a vision chip, and this other company is called Incore, which is building a RISC-V core, right? So as sort of India sort of starts building that, India has about 30 or so semiconductor startups, and I think you'll see now these companies take time, right? It's not like launching an app where two developers sitting in Bangalore can kind of in 2 months crank something out and boom, it'll do something. These tend to take a lot more time. So I would say across every one of these sort of segments, if you will, right? Like semiconductors, drones, defense, advanced manufacturing. We are beginning to see some very, very interesting innovation. What I would say in those sectors, Seema, and I've said this publicly before, we're probably where SaaS was around 2010, 2012, right? Zoho was 2004, Freshworks, sort of, which kicked off the whole SaaS era, especially SaaS targeting SMBs globally, was 2009, 2010. And then we started seeing a bunch of companies between 2010 and 2015, which are now unicorns, right? Companies like Innovasa and so on and so forth. So that's probably where we are. I would say this decade is going to be really about sort of the first set of companies that will get to scale. Let's take biosciences. We have a company in Gurgaon called Absolute. It's fantastic. I mean, they've launched a set of bio agri products, right? Biopesticides, bioherbicides, biofertilizers. It's business is growing very, very fast. Next set of products are going to be like biomaterials, and they launch bionutrients. So like you'll see a bunch of these companies. This company that we are not investors in, but that I'm a big fan of, called String Bio, in Bangalore, right? So they take methane and then convert it into ag input. Super interesting sort of different technologies. So what you'll see this year, I think, is more of these companies getting founded, but also a couple of them beginning to break out. And as you know, like in every space, right, you need those one or two breakout companies, and then it becomes sort of much easier for companies to start up, to raise capital, and build. So it's very much started. We think India now is sort of firing in all cylinders, if you will, right, where we have innovation across almost every sector that you could imagine, from consumer brands, vertical commerce, gaming, AI, but also this sort of deep tech, many of the deep tech segments.
And for Rajan, for all of the founders here who are building a Gen AI startup, like what would your words of advice be to them as they embark on this journey?
I think the most important thing is to focus on the right problem, right, and really make sure that you can build a 10x product. And then I would ask this question of, 2 years from now, let's assume everything goes well. Why is it that, not now, but 2 years from now, why is it that it'll be, I'll assume that, by the way, the models are going to get 10x better. Assume that the models are going to get 10x cheaper, 10x better, etc. Why? I'm talking about the application layer. Okay, so those are the questions to really ask. Can you build a truly a 10x product, and then second, 2 years from now, assuming models are going to get better and cheaper, 10x better, 10x cheaper, can you still have a meaningful sort of competitive advantage, right? And let's just, but by the way, anytime a space is successful, there are going to be dozens of competitors. Okay, so you should assume that. A lot of founders assume that, oh wow, I didn't realize there's going to be 20 competitors. Just assume there are going to be 20 competitors. Okay, so I think focusing. I think a lot of when you're starting up, I think the problem that you're going to solve is so important, Seema, as you know. And I don't see enough founders. We see, like, it's interesting, right? I meet 5 new companies every single day, except for Mondays. Mondays we have our investment committee meetings. Outside of Mondays, every day I see five. I'm on vacation this week, so in the US I'm not, but five, right? So 5 new companies every single day, because that's sort of, firstly, we see a large number of companies. But I'm always surprised at how many high caliber teams, very high caliber teams, are just not focusing on a problem that has this sort of 10x potential, right? Similarly, if you take infra and tooling, right, like there's a lot of what's happening in India, as you know, is in many industries like payments, in transactional commerce. India is getting to be of true world scale, right? So even on the tooling and the infrastructure side, because we have these environments in India now, which are truly massive scale sort of operating environments on a tech side, right? There's a potential to come up with new tooling that is, let's just take privacy or security or LLM. Like all these spaces are pretty crowded, but like just think about, look, can you really build something that's 10x here? And then the other thing is also, look, it is this is a speed game, right? Speed is super important, right? So one, are you we have 10x second. Can you build quickly now? Now, by the way, lots of products will take 2 years to build, especially if you're building deep sort of infrastructure type products. But once you launch, they need to basically go to the moon. But I'd say focus on, and I think that's why this hackathon is really interesting, is just make sure you're focusing on the right problem.
And just adding to that, like Rajan, in terms of just talent, right? Like we have the largest number of developers globally in this whole like AI space and research and things around that. Like, how do you view the talent in India? Do you think the talent is actually coming up the curve pretty quickly on these new technologies? Are startups being able to get the right talent in somewhat of a easy manner, or has it been a hard climb for them? What's your take on talent, or do you think it's a journey that we will definitely get there, but right now it looks like we really need to invest in that space?
Yeah, look, I would answer that as, look, we have more than adequate talent to make India the global hub for AI applications. Okay, we have because that doesn't require sort of the Stanford PhD researchers or the DeepMind researchers. Manish's team at DeepMind India have a bunch of good researchers, right? Like, so because you don't require that level of talent, right? But you need sort of good talent who can learn fast. I mean, look, the reality is, in many ways, like it's sort of a level playing field, right? Everything is changing so quickly. So what you really want to do is have the ability to learn very fast and apply things very fast. So I would say for the application. At the application layer, we don't really have a talent shortage per se. I would say for in especially, let's say, vertical AI, for instance, we have maybe an access problem, right? Which is, if you're trying to build for the largest market in the world, which is US, you're trying to build a global company, right? Not a India only. That's one thing maybe we should talk about. Like, do you only build for India? Do you build for the world, right? I mean, there's ways to think about. What you want is access to large customers, so you can actually go and start building these things, and really make sure you're building something 10x. So I would say that is where the gap is. In fact, Seema, if you guys want to do something really interesting as Google to really jumpstart the GenAI ecosystem, I would take 50 founders from India who are trying to solve stuff in these big verticals, right? Finance, energy, healthcare, and so retail, and so on and so forth. And I would just have them come and spend 6 months in
Yeah.
the US, give them access through your cloud networks, your GCP business, your ads business, to customers, so that they can really go and embed themselves and start building these things. So it's more access. I don't see a talent gap per se, because on the application layer, I do think at the when you think about foundation models, frontier models, what's next, etc., we do have a gap, and we have a gap because we don't have as much research happening in our academic institutions, right? The US, I mean, just Berkeley has more. Let's just take an area like NLP, for instance, or like let's take GenAI. Okay, Berkeley has more researchers than we do in all of the US top 10 US academic research institutions put together, right? So I think we don't have as many researchers, and in our companies, I mean, we don't have yet a Google Gemini or an OpenAI or a Claude yet, right? Now, over time, that will change as Sarvam gets built out, Krim gets built out, some of these other companies get built out. So that's why I think at the research level, we certainly have a gap. There's no question. But at the application level, talent is not. I think we have the talent, right? By the way, we showed that even in the last wave, right? Like
Yeah.
the first Indian SaaS unicorn was Freshworks 2018. Today we have 25 of them. I'm very
Yeah.
convinced that by 2030 we're going to have 100 software product unicorns from India, right? Now a lot of them actually will have GenAI at their core, because now
Yeah.
that's what you have it. So therefore you can build and deliver 10x 10x type products. So long answer to your question, I wouldn't. I'm not as worried about the talent on the application side. I would like to see us as an ecosystem have a lot more research being done at our academic universities. I'd love to see Google DeepMind, for instance, go from X to 10x in terms of number of researchers that DeepMind has in India. I'd love to see OpenAI set up R&D in India, similarly with Microsoft and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely an area where we need to step up. But yeah, I think we do have the talent that can take research to products and take it from India to global. And just on that point of India to global, like what's your advice these days to founders? Is it like focus on one market? India's big enough? Is it go global from the get go? What hours are they hybrid? Test in India, then take it abroad. Like what's sort of the advice that you have given, or what are
Yeah,
you seeing?
I think, yeah, it's a. Well, firstly, I think the Indian IPO markets are open for business for startups that are
Yeah.
profitable. Okay, so what you're seeing across industries, even including software products, is lots of companies are, that incorporate their companies outside of India are now basically re-domiciling India so that they can access the public markets. Of course, once they have a few hundred crores of revenue at a minimum and are profitable, right? So let's just set that aside. But that's an important. For instance, if you're thinking about where to incorporate your company, I would the old playbook of incorporate outside may not be the right answer today. So now I think coming to this question, look, the reality, Seema, is for an Indian entrepreneur building a, let's say, on application AI application company targeting India is gives you a much it gives you a competitive advantage, right? Because you're closer to the customers, you're closer to the data, so on and so forth. And the reality is, there's just a lot more data, right? Like, so for instance, I'm on this evaluation committee to pick the AI. There's going to be 3 AI centers of excellence in India's academic research institutions. Each one is going to get a large amount of capital over 5 years to actually do this research. And through that, I got like some exposure to the kind of problems that can be solved. Let's take healthcare, right? In every, whether it's cancer, whether it's diabetes, whether it's heart disease, whether it's X-rays, so on and so forth. Um, Reality is we have a lot more data than any other country in the world outside China, and it's accessible. Okay, so in that context, the possibility of building 10x products in a less competitive market in India is much higher. But the challenge is monetization potential is lower. Okay, so the question you should ask is, one, can you build a 10x product? But especially if you're going to build on India, build for India first, you should ask the question, okay, can we monetize this at scale? Okay, you don't have to have like $100 million of revenue, sort of 800 crores or 1,000 crores, but at least get to like 100 crores or 200 crores, right? Otherwise, if it's going to be 5, 10 crores, 3 years or 4 years from now, that's sort of a slog. So I think that's the question. I would say even today, um, I would prefer to see a company, especially on the application side, launch. So I'd say vertical or enterprise, be a global company targeting the US. And if you are going to build a global business, let's say US is going to be a largest market, I think there's a lot of benefit, Seema, to targeting the US from day one, because your design partners there, the reality is the needs are different, the requirements are different. Sure, the data from India will help you get much better, but the fact is, look, just because you have, let's say, 2 large hospital chains in India, maybe you got Apollo, maybe you got Vedanta, whatever, that's not going to really help you go land Mayo Clinic in the US, right? So, whereas if you got Mayo Clinic, it'll help you with many more. I'm just picking that as an example. Many more other healthcare institutions in the US. So, for instance, if you got Dr. Reddy's versus you got Pfizer or Merck, Pfizer or Merck would help you much more to build something that is much more tailored to the US market that you can scale in the US. So, there's no right answer, but one simple sort of way you can, as a founder, you can think about it is, look, if you focused only on India, sure, you can build something 10x better, but will you be able to also get to a company of revenue? Because that's a question that matters to you, right? Because if you're going to spend the next 10 years building a company, at a minimum, you want it to get to 1,000 crores of revenue and be very profitable, not get to 100 crores, right? And today, by the way, what we're seeing in industry after industry, not just in AI, Seema, as you know, is companies are able to go from 0 to 100
Yeah.
crores literally in 2 years, which is crazy in the domestic market, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing that already, especially with consumer products and vertical commerce and gaming and things like that. Now the question is, with these AI products, so you don't have to get to 100 crores in 2 years, but certainly in 3, 4 years, you want to be able to see yourself getting to that 100 crore revenue mark and then scale from there from 100 crores to 1,000 crores.
All right, thank you, Rajan. We will now move to Q&A and give the opportunity for our audience to ask you some questions. So the first question we have is from Anand. How would Gen AI impact MSME or local Indian businesses?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Anand. Short answer is, look, it will make a lot of things easier. See, today, for SMBs, right, they don't have the skills to do a lot of things. They don't have the budgets to afford to buy very expensive software. Let's just take one that is close to Google's heart, okay? Advertising, right? So SMB advertising, which is a business in India today. By the way, the digital ad market has crossed $10 billion, 80,000 crores. About half of that comes from small businesses, as the Google team knows and Seema. But small businesses struggle, right, to find the talent that can help them optimize campaigns, run campaigns, etc. Look, today with AI, I mean, Google already has Google and Meta and so on have already built in a lot of AI to make things much easier. So things like, hey, look, just give me the budget, give me the objectives, I'll take care of the rest from a platform standpoint. But the reality is today, can you build AI agents, right? So, like, imagine if you're a small business today and you have three types of marketing agents, okay? One does performance marketing, one does something else, etc. Then you have three agents for accounting. Then you have three agents for one agent for finance. You have one agent. So you could imagine like this building a set of agents for small businesses, right? This makes them do their get their work done, right? Because they have two challenges. One, they can't hire people because nobody, the best talent doesn't want to go work for them. But the other is, it's expensive, right? Now, of course, you don't want to price these agents as the cost of a human, because in India, talent, human talent is not as expensive. So I think again it goes back to this question. Okay, can you build something 10x for SMBs? What is that you could build that's 10x? I think with Indian SMBs, you have to ask this additional question that's really, really important, which is how much will they pay for it? Okay, because selling software to Indian SMBs, monetizing software to Indian small businesses has been one of the hardest problems to solve, right? There's one company that solved it called Tally, on just paying for software. Now, of course, advertising, Google, Meta, proven that you can build businesses with tens of thousands of crores. So that's done. Capital lending, yes, absolutely. In fact, we have a couple of companies that started off with SMB SaaS, but now pivoted to sort of fintech companies. Yes, you can do that through lending. But in terms of just being able to pay for software, I think we're some ways away. So really asking that hard question, I think, is very important.
We'll take another question. This will be our last. This is from Pranav. How can we think about scale? Are there any specific metrics at this level we should consider?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, scale really depends on what you're building, right? Are you building an application company? And if it's an application company, are you building for consumers? Are you building for small businesses, mid-market, etc.? Um, uh, so I would say the first thing is, look, you got to just build something that's truly 10x. And then let's say you're building it for financial services companies, okay? Let's say you're building a research co-pilot, buy side, very focused, okay? So let's say you're building something for uh, analysts in, I don't know, equity research analysts or whatever, right? Uh, and then the question is, look, can you get five analysts, uh, you know, per institution across five or six large firms, right, to use it. So you've got five customers. In each customer, you've got 5 or 10 analysts working on it. I think at that level, then you start understanding: have you built something that, number one, works? Works meaning, like the users of the product find it very, very useful. And number two, are they willing to pay for it, right? And number three, of course, if it's an application, you want to make sure it doesn't hallucinate, because you don't want to have a model hallucinate while a research analyst is trying to figure out like what stock to do research on. So I would say it's not, there's no one answer to this question of scale. But I'm talking about scale as in, like, you mean the next 6 or 12 months, right? What level of traction do you want to see? So really, it depends a lot on the kind of business you're trying to build and the kind of products that you're trying to build.
Thank you. Thank you all for asking those questions. Thank you, Rajan, for your time and sharing all of your insights with our founders. And thank you all for joining. I hope you found the session insightful, and join in for more such exciting speaker sessions and technical workshops that have been planned for all of you. On that note, please stay tuned for the upcoming technical workshop on prompt engineering and image generation using Google Imagen. If you haven't registered yet for the hackathon, please find the registration link in your chat box. And thank you. Have a great day. Thank you again, Rajan. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you for hosting us. All the best to all the founders.
Welcome everyone to the technical sessions as part of the GenAI Exchange Hackathon. Just a quick check. I hope I'm heard and the screen is visible. Yeah, all right. Welcome everyone to the technical sessions as part of the GenAI Exchange Hackathon. Uh, if you haven't registered for the hackathon already, please make sure you do that with the registration link in the chat box. So today is the first day of the technical workshops, and we'll be doing a deep dive into prompt engineering and image generation using Google Imagen. I'm Sanskriti. I'm a customer engineer at Google Cloud, and I'll be hosting the workshop today. Feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the session, and if time permits, we'll sort of try to answer some of them at the end, right? So let's get started. Like I briefed, the session will be in three parts. We'll do a quick recap of what GenAI has to offer in the uh, industry and where does Google come into the picture. Then we'll sort of move into prompt engineering. Now, prompt engineering in itself is a science, and it sort of works hand in hand with how we interact with the generative AI models in the market. And then we'll sort of go into how Google tackles image generation, right? And again, talk about some best practices in terms of how do I prompt for image generation. Uh, so getting started with Google GenAI, right? What do we have to offer there? So, generative AI and large language models promise incredible opportunity for industries to basically innovate and sort of create new business value. Traditionally, there was a challenge in terms of how do we collect all this data, how do we extract information from it, how do we manage these complex, massive data sets, right? What LLMs have done now is they've processed the world's publicly available data, may it be text, maybe audio, maybe images, right? It's become multimodal now and make it accessible to businesses through intuitive interfaces. Now that we are able to make machine think more intuitively, more like humans, we're able to make online interactions easier, right? Allowing companies to interact with large audiences and reach large audiences with minimal human touch. LLMs are also helping businesses through content generation, which makes productivity a lot more at peak, because a lot of these creative tasks, a lot of these operational tasks as well, right, which is getting handed off to generative AI. Now the use cases sort of are really way beyond what is on the slide, but the core sort of pillars we see companies sort of using generative AI is for creation of content, creation of new ideas, for sort of condensing or summarizing information they already have in place, discovering information. This really keys into how does retrieval work, how do we retrieve from large corpuses of data, how do we sort of discover relevant information, and then how can we also use generative AI to automate some tasks, right? Let it be content extraction, or a lot of businesses are sort of removing their auditors, right? The auditors who sort of get into your call analytics and look at how the customer service support is handling their calls. That auditing can be made automated now using generative AI. So now let's dive a bit deeper into our product portfolio at Google Cloud. So what you see here in blue is basically what we already had in place. And with the recent interest in generative AI and LLMs, Google Cloud has got the perfect opportunity to sort of expand on its uh, LLM offerings, right? Where it's able to meet across the board, right? Which is business users, developers, AI practitioners. So we have products across the spectrum. When we're looking at business users, we have uh, more use case specific products, let it be document AI for document parsing, or healthcare AI for the healthcare space, contact center AI. Then we have Agent Builder, which is sort of something which is powered by generative AI, which gives you access to out of the box and customizable uh, apps. Now, these apps could be chat apps or search apps, which connect to your data, and you build this out of the box, right? So when you actually go into the console, it's a matter of attaching your data source, and you have your at least rudimentary MVP apps ready to go, right? Of course, with businesses, there is always tuning required, and you do have that capability as well, right? Where we go one step beyond our foundation models and actually fine tune them for our use case. Uh, with Vertex AI, we were already offering an AI platform with end-to-end ML capabilities, which sort of spanned the use cases for data science teams, for ML practitioners to sort of fast track their ML model development and deployment, from feature engineering to model training to even inference, right? All with that enterprise class of governance and monitoring. Now, what we have added to that is the generative AI piece, and now you're getting a sort of unified platform for both of your predictive and generative AI needs, right? Uh, just a quick touch on how we're looking at AI models now available on Vertex AI. So, uh, Vertex AI Model Garden, which is sort of, you could think of it like a repository of uh, models, both Google Cloud specific, from partners, from open source models, all of it in one sort of interface, again across modalities. So we're talking about text, chat, image, code, speech. We have specialized models for creating embeddings out of your data. All of that within a single platform, right? Which gives you sort of that choice and flexibility to choose between models. Now, that choice could be dependent on price, performance, your latency requirements, your compliance requirements, all of that, right? So the idea is to be able to give you a spectrum of models. uh, with Google foundation models, we have Gemini, which is our latest foundation model for uh, uh, language understanding, image understanding, multimodal understanding. We have Imagen, which we'll be discussing about a little further today, which is specifically for text to image, right? Where our output is image creation. We have Chirp, which is to understand speech. We have Cody, and then we have our embeddings API. Along with this, we have also partner or open ecosystem models, right? Like Claude, we have Llama, and the idea is that you do get your flexibility. Let's say Llama works better for you, go with that flexibility, but still make use of Vertex AI's platform, right? That is the flexibility we want to give our customers, that if any model suits your need, which is part of Model Garden, fair enough. But we want to still give you the flexibility to be able to fine tune it, train it, deploy it on Vertex AI. So that was just a general brief. Now, today we are not deep diving into Vertex AI at all, nor are we actually getting too much into our products. The idea is to go back with a better understanding of how prompting works. Prompting is sort of your bread and butter, right? It's the most basic first step when you're interacting with LLMs. It comes way before you think about fine tuning. It comes way before you think about complex architectures like RAG, like sort of looking into human feedback for training your models. Before all of that, right? Prompting is your first step towards interacting with your LLMs, and that's what we want to sort of focus on today. So what is a prompt, right? With Gen AI being all the rage, I think the concept of what prompting is isn't new anymore. Yeah, a prompt is basically just a fancy word which sort of talks about the text you feed into your model, right? How do I give an instruction to my model? How do I sort of tell my model what I want it to do? That's about it. And as it turns out, there's a whole art and science known as prompt design, prompt engineering, prompting, priming, context, in context learning, uh, behind how to write prompts, right? And it's basically figuring out how do I write my prompt, how do I format my prompt to make my LLM perform the way I want it to. Now, few things to keep in mind before we, look at these tips and tricks which I will share today. Uh, every LLM is unique, and it has its own strengths and weaknesses. It has its own quirks, and some of these techniques will work better on some models than others. Of course, the tips and tricks I will be talking about today, we've tried and tested it with Gemini, and they do work very well with Gemini, but some of these span across models, right? It's not necessary that it's specific to Gemini or specific to any large language model. These are just best practices in the industry which seem to have worked well over time, right? Uh, now, the idea is also that you need to be open to experimentation. Prompt techniques are only considered a basis for your exploration, and it doesn't really mean that it's a silver bullet where you follow these tips and it's going to work out perfect for you. That's also not the case, but it is definitely a great starting point, right? And as our models evolve, we tend to see that the way they interact with prompts also changes, and we sort of have to keep in touch with those best practices, right? So breaking down a prompt. So, a prompt basically will consist of your input. Your input would be your prompt instructions itself. It could also include dynamic variables. Now, when I say dynamic variables, I mean any sort of input, right? Let's say in this example, I am actually looking at classifying wines, right? If I'm giving an input wine, how do I classify it into red and white? So, what I've done is I have actually first given system instructions. System instructions basically control the way your model behaves. Along with that, we have the actual prompt instructions, and then we have some examples. And then we have the dynamic input, which is the wine we want to actually classify. So, prompt would be a mix of all of these components, where we have system instructions, where we have your prompt input itself, and then your dynamic variables, right? The idea is when we create these templates, we make these templates reusable, right? Let's say you're writing a prompt for translation. Now, your input and output language would be dynamic. Your actual text to be translated would be dynamic. So the idea behind a prompt template is to reduce the task of writing a specific new prompt for every new request you're sending to the LLM, right? Along with the prompt itself, we have the prompt configuration. Now, this is basically the model you are actually hitting when you're giving that prompt request. This could be based on your requirement, based on your trial and error. Again, the model deciding the model becomes a task of evaluation. We do further, as part of the technical series, also have a specific session which discusses evaluation, right, which is comparing and contrasting different models. But the idea is to be able to use these prompt parameters or configuration parameters to be able to tune how the model behaves, right? And we'll talk a bit about these as well later in today's demo. Moving on to the prompt development lifecycle. Now, how do we go through the process of prompting or defining prompts? The emphasis is basically always going to be on that rigorous testing and systematic testing, right? There's no silver bullet. Like I said, you need to do a bit of trial and error, and it's a given. Even when I sit down to write a prompt, my first prompt is going to take me 5 minutes, right? Max 10 minutes. But that's almost 90% of the time is not going to be my final prompt. Very few times do you hit it right on the get-go, right? So the process is basically you define your success criteria, you define what you want your responses to look like, you define what your test cases could look like, then you go into the art of engineering your prompt or writing down that first prompt or the components of the prompt. You could have multiple sort of components in the prompt or multiple tasks. Then you get into the cycle, right, which is evaluating and then revising and refining your prompt based on the performance. And this cycle takes a bit of time sometimes, and this is where your core lies. This is where the beauty of prompt engineering lies. And once you're sort of done with that, you actually get into your use case. So now we'll actually jump into how do we really break down a prompt in terms of best practices, in terms of components of a prompt. So starting off with the components of a prompt, right? What are the different parts of a prompt which sort of make it more full, make it more rich, and make it more likely that your LLM behaves the way you want it to? So for simple tasks, a clear and concise instruction, like the wine example, right? It was not very complex. It works well enough. But for complex tasks, there is a requirement for really carefully looking at the structure of your prompt and ensuring that we write the prompt in such a way that your model performs consistently and performs as intended, right? So the reason to craft your prompt in a way that even though you run it multiple times, it has some understanding and some instructions given to it. So the response is still adhering to our requirement. Uh, so let's sort of get into these, right? So first we have persona. Now, the persona would be who your model is pretending to be or what sort of role they are pursuing, right? This would basically steer the model output in a certain direction, in a certain thought process. Then we give it a goal. Basically, what do you want to achieve? Here you need to be very specific and sort of encompass all the sort of tasks it will be handling. When we go into the task, it could be either step by step instructions on how do I solve this user requirement, or it could be actually mapping out an entire user experience, right? If you're building a prompt for a chatbot, you sort of need to define that entire end to end thought process for the user experience. Along with that, in the prompt itself, you do have the capability of uh, channeling the tone of the response. So you could decide if you want your response to be formal, playful, technical, creative, all of that, right? Then we look at safeguarding. Now, safeguarding is basically sort of safety rules. Now, why does this become important? Because our LLMs are trained on a lot of data. They have the capability to answer questions beyond your requirement, right? So the idea for safeguards is basically to ground the questions to a mission. When I say that you are a travel assistant chatbot, right? Or you're an agent who specializes in advising for travel plans, I'm grounding its mission to this task, and this helps it not deviate and answer randomly, right? And this really does come into help when you're actually looking at using these prompts in your industry use cases. Uh, on Beyond that, there are some additional parameters which we can look at. We have context. Context could be relevant background information that helps the model understand the nuances of the task. Now, the more the context, it is usually better, but Again, there are some guidelines around it. You don't want to dump too much information in the prompt, because sometimes it could be irrelevant, it could be disturbing, it could confuse the LLM, right? So there's a fine sort of art in understanding what context is relevant to this task and how do I pass that context. Oftentimes, LLMs have seen to perform well when you give them an example of what you want your output to look like. Now, this example could be more in terms of what is the context of the response, or it could be in the formatting or the writing style of the response, right? And that tends to make the perform a model perform better. Then we look at constraints. Now, constraints or restrictions are basically sort of do's and don'ts. A lot of times, let's say, are trying to restrict a certain behavior, right? You do not want it to return a certain set of information. So you call it out. You say that, hey, don't do this, and rather do this, right? So these do's and don'ts are sort of constraints and guardrails around how the model generates outputs. And to a large extent, these can be controlled using your prompt, right? Without Till now we haven't spoken about fine tuning. We've not spoken about actually attaching it to a external data source, right? Just using the prompt, we can actually tackle a lot of requirements you might have for your use case. Lastly, we have the output format. I have in some ways covered this already, but it's basically specifying how do you want your response to be structured, right? Oftentimes, we want them to be in the JSON format, because you can use that for post processing, plug it into your databases, or you could want it in Markdown format, paragraph, bulleted list. So you can really decide how you want that output to look like. Let's look at an example to sort of understand this better. Here you see an example of a prompt for a travel assistant. The example I sort of picked up a while back, which builds itineraries based on location, right? So here the prompt clearly tells the role it has to play, which says you're a seasoned travel blogger with the knack of finding hidden gems. Now, this is your persona, and your goal is to create unforgettable travel itineraries, right, for your user. So we've given it a persona, we've given it a goal. uh, the context here which we are giving is, your typical customer is of the age of 25 to 35 or 20 to 35, who's looking for something adventurous, is budget conscious. So again, this is very specific, but the idea behind a context, and your context could be your user profile data being plugged in, right? The idea is basically to give it some background knowledge to base its answer on. uh, Beyond that, we also then follow it with instructions, which is how do I actually go ahead and create this itinerary. So you give a set of instructions to it, you tell it to document a potential user journey, and identify sort of different activities to do in that specific location. Additionally, we can also define the tone, right? Saying that, go beyond the existing usual itineraries, try to be innovative, try to be creative. And we can sort of tune the way we want the model to respond. In the same way, we are talking about how do I format these itineraries. We want it to be, returned in a columnar format with date, location, experiences, things to do, and the how, right? So this end to end, both these slides sort of give an example of a very simple structure of a prompt, and how different components actually will help you make your prompt perform better. Now, getting into the actual tips and tricks, I have about 10 tips which I had in mind, which I wanted to share with you today, but it goes beyond this, right? To be very honest, it goes way beyond this, and it requires trials and errors, a lot of evaluation, and really understanding the business use case, right? The tips we'll cover today will be more on the level which caters to all use cases, but based on your use cases, you will have to come up with your own tips and tricks. So, starting off, the first tip, the most important one, is simplifying your instructions, right? As mentioned earlier, you do not need to be very verbose. You do not need to write down every single thing in a sentence. Gemini or many of the models really follow terse instructions pretty well and closely. So you can have phrases, you can have sort of just important parts of the instruction defined. You don't have to write really verbose long sentences. Sometimes this tends to really affect the model performance and reduce the quality. In this example, you can see that we've written a very simple prompt where we have given a persona, we've given a task, and we've given the input, right? There are no examples because not every use case actually needs examples. So it's very simple, it's very straightforward, and the model is still able to give an output, right? Which is quite decent and is doing a decent job at the task. So the first step would be basically simplifying your instructions. The second would be while you need to keep them simple, keep them short as possible, that doesn't mean you're not very specific with your requirement, right? Here in the example, in the first prompt, I have given a very simple instruction saying summarize the meeting notes, right? Now, this will work. Of course, it will work, but you have no control on how the LLM is responding, right? It could summarize in any way it wants, in any length it wants. It might cover some points you didn't want it to cover, right? In the second enhanced prompt, for example, I'm giving it specific and explicit instructions, right? I'm saying summarize the meeting notes in a single paragraph, write it down in a markdown list of speakers with the key points of each of their speakers highlighted, then list down the next steps and the action items. So now I'm not just saying summarize, but I'm also giving it a sense of what do I need in this summary, right? What sort of details I want covered in this summary. These sort of clear and specific instructions ensure that your LLM is guided and it's not sort of uh, returning a different type of output every time, right? The consistency is what we try to achieve using these clear and specific instructions. Here is another example of a prompt where I'm sort of giving a call to action for a product. Now, on the left, you can see that I've sort of really become very verbose, right? I'm saying uh, a lot of instructions scattered across the prompt. Then I say do not include any header. The call to action should be enthusiastic. The call to action should be in English. The call to action. So I'm repeating the same thing again and again, and it's too much text, right? And you can see that the output is also not really in a tone or a specific compressed summary format which I would require. Now, in the second side, you can see that I've made it a lot more cleaner. I've said, generate a numbered list with five catchy call to actions for an eco-friendly product. I've given some constraints. I'm saying that the output needs to be a numbered list. It needs to be an enthusiastic tone. The target audience is XYZ, and give me the output. Right now, both the instructions will work, but we have seen that Gemini or most of our LLM models, right, they tend to perform better when we're clearer and not sort of giving it too many instructions which are repeating or redundant. The third tip would be giving it a persona. Now, we've already sort of spoken about this, but the idea is to give a persona so the LLM sort of steers its responses and also sort of focuses its context based on the persona you have given it, right? Now, there are two, again, prompts which are given. Let's say I'm trying to build an internal bot which asks questions, right, based on public documents for networking products. Now, if I directly ask what is the most reliable GCP load balancer, well, it will answer, but we are kind of jumping straight into the question, right? We're not sort of giving it a persona. So it might not fully understand what it needs to do or why this question is coming out of the blue, right? So it would be better if we modify the prompt to call out a persona saying, hey, you're a Google Cloud Platform technical support engineer who specializes in cloud networking, right? And when we have a use case in mind, it's better to give a persona which matches that use case. Because now you can really change the tone, the quality, and the length of the response, right? And that's the idea behind adopting a persona to help improve the accuracy. The fourth tip would be to sort of limit your preamble. Now, your preamble is your persona, your goal, sort of the overview, right, of what the prompt needs to do. Now, having a longer verbose preamble with too many instructions becomes complicated and difficult to understand. Again, we're going back to the concept of simplifying the instructions, keeping it short, removing any redundant instruction or repeated instruction, and making it very clear, right? We don't want to in 10 different places say that, return a JSON output. Because let's say in the first one, you don't give the format, and the second, you give the format. It's sort of getting confused as to which instruction it needs to follow, because it has a lot of ambiguity and a lot of repeated instructions. So we're trying to avoid that by keeping the preamble and the instruction short and straightforward. Then with Gemini, we give you access to safety filters. Now, the idea behind safety filters is built-in content filtering within Vertex AI itself, which allows you to deploy your applications more safely and responsibly. What these safety filters do is basically, let's say, you can see the categories here, right? It's harassment, hate speech, sexually explicit content, dangerous content. We have these categories which we have designed, and our models have an understanding of uh, what uh, could categorize as this sort of content, and what it'll do is it'll automatically block that response, right? So it never reaches your application. It'll give you an empty response saying that, we hit the safety filter and we weren't able to return the output. You do get to control this threshold. By default, we have our threshold set to high because we want to be as safe as possible. But if your use case requires you to change or tweak this by a bit, we do allow for that. uh, but the idea is to be responsible when we are building any application, have those safety filters, understand that uh, we need to be responsible when we are using AI models. At the end of the day, they are trained on a lot of public data, and that means there is content that's been trained on, which could lead to sort of data getting generated which might not be safe for consumers. So these safety filters help with that, and we make it quite easy with three simple steps. You sort of just add your safety filters and plug it into your generation configuration, right? So when you're configuring your call to our models, you sort of just plug this in. Now getting into the more customizing of your uh, prompt itself, right, or your parameters. So a tip would be really to experiment with the temperature. Now, temperature helps tune the degree of randomness and control how creative or conservative your model response would be. The optimal temperature really depends on your use case and the model, and the kind of desired response style you're looking for. It is recommended to set a higher temperature when you're going for creative tasks or instruction following, and we have seen lower temperatures perform better when the use cases fall in the lines of maybe code generation or factual tasks, right? Again, really narrowing down on your temperature will require some prompt iterations and testing. We recommend that start off with a zero point 0.5 if you're really unsure with Gemini, and you sort of go up and down, right, based on your requirement. Uh, and that will sort of let you see how the model is responding based on the temperature, and tune your responses accordingly, right? Moving on to the concept of using examples, right? So we have seen that when we are talking about few short examples or giving examples to your LLMs, uh, there is a possibility of having too many examples. What we have seen is using fewer examples which have variety work better. The recommendation is to start with maybe 2 or 3 examples and then maybe go up to 5 in most use cases. Interestingly, when we were evaluating for a use case which was to generate a JSON format, we saw that when we give one example of an output, the performance, you can see the chart, right? When we give one example, it performed pretty well. But when we actually started increasing the examples, the performance deteriorated. So there, again, is the concept of really testing out how many examples are needed. In most cases with Gemini, we've seen that 2 to 3 performs well. Going beyond that tends to confuse the model, tends to make the output a bit all over the place, right, or confusing. So it's better to give lesser examples but with variety, right? So you have two, three sort of situations you're catering to. Maybe give just those examples, right? And you don't have to be exhaustive with your examples, and that's the idea we want to go back with, right? Do not be exhaustive with your examples. The idea of using LLMs is so you don't have to call out every action or every possible outcome. So just a few examples work at most times, and we recommend to stick to those. The next step would be to limit the negative examples and instructions in your prompt. It's always better to say what to do rather than what not to do. Uh, I find this kind of funny because it's almost like a child, right? Or at least the analogy matches where it's better to guide the child to do what it needs to do instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, because sometimes this type of instruction doesn't work well, and negative constraints tend to have a confusing impact, right? So it's better to, for example, if you see the examples in the first one, I'm saying do not ask for interest, do not ask for personal information, and then I'm sort of giving it some instructions, right? Instead, in the second one, I'm saying that the following agent is going to recommend a movie to the customer. The agent's responsible to recommend a movie from the top global trending movies. It should refrain from asking users their preferences. So in the first one, we don't really cover the fact that, go with the global trending movies. Don't really get into their personal preferences. First one, we are just saying, don't ask personal questions. Sometimes the model is not sure that, okay, I don't ask personal questions, but how do I answer this question then? This actually makes it easier, right? Because now you are giving it an understanding that, hey, this is your target, this is what you need to do, and then you sort of go ahead and tackle the customer query. So this works out well. We've seen that limiting negative examples and instructions work well. Another example would be this case. Right now, this is a lot more obvious where in the left-hand side, I have given examples which are cases where the model is just responding with, sorry, I cannot help you with that question, right? I'm not giving any positive examples here. Now, this will naturally lead to the model not being able to perform very well because it's not understood how a positive response even looks like. So again, having too many negative examples does not help. It's better to give simple, clear instructions, try to minimize or remove negative examples as much as possible, uh, and then sort of write your prompt, right? Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. In a lot of use cases, you will see that the model is having some sort of hallucination or you wanted to behave a certain way. That time you do need negative prompts, right? You say that, do not make up any information or do not answer on any topic except xyz. So if your use case requires for it, of course have negative example. It's not, the idea is not to eliminate negative examples altogether, but try to also instruct the agent or the LLM in terms of what it needs to do. So that tends to work better. Next, we are moving on to how do I structure the prompt. Now, using prompt separators really works well to basically clearly identify the distinct components of a prompt and demarcate the instruction blocks. This can clearly make a difference when you're trying to refer to specific sections of the prompt or, uh, you know, uh, actually distinguish between the examples, the context, the instructions, and the query, right? Here we've sort of shown an example where we're using XML tags, but you could very well use markdown formatting or other sort of delimiters to sort of demarcate between your different components, right? Moving on to sort of complementary point, we've seen XML tags to work really well for Gemini. Specifically when we're working with complex prompts. Here you can see that I in red have sort of marked a particular section of the prompt. So when I'm using these XML tags, right, it also helps me refer to different sections of the prompt throughout my instructions, right? So here I've said that you can access, I've said that you're a chatbot answering customer questions in a chat. Your task is to answer the question based on the data. Now the data will be defined here, and then you can access the order history in the order section. The order section's here. So the idea is when I'm using these demarcators, I'm also not only making it clearer to the LLM as to what each component means, but I'm also able to cross reference, right? And that really does help sometimes when we're trying to use the contextual data or trying to use user data while answering a question using a LLM prompt. Now, moving on to structuring the prompt. Now we're going in the same lines of using these XML tags. But the idea is when you're looking at a model like Gemini, right, with a 2 million context window, you could have a lot of content in your prompt itself. And sometimes you have multiple sources, input sources, and documents being plugged into your prompt. In those cases, it is again really important to structure your prompt and separate out the input data, right? This again is an example of a RAG based application. I'll talk a little bit about what RAG is and how that approach works. But here we're basically plugging in external data into our prompt. And what we've done is we've sort of demarcated different documents, so the LLM understands better what sort of data it's working with, and sort of separates this data from the instructions and the prompt itself. Next is the location of the instruction, again with larger context documents or prompts. We have seen that placing the instruction right at the end tends to help the model perform better. Now, logically, when you think about it, right, there's no real specific reason it's behaving this way, but these are sort of best practices and tips we have seen working well across our experimentation, right? And working to the extent where we feel like these could be considered as best practices and sort of tips which can help you start with prompt engineering for Gemini. So yeah, again, with the location of the instruction actually does matter, and where are you placing your user input, where are you placing your instructions, where is the persona being defined, all of that really matters, right? And that is really crucial to how your LLM actually responds. We've sort of covered the tips. A few more sort of ways to prime Gemini or sort of prompt it to behave a certain way is asking it to reason and add thoughts while providing an answer. I've done this maybe using, provide your thought process to explain how you reason to provide the response. Now, when you're telling it to give an explanation for its answer, it better follows instruction. And this we have seen works very well to sort of understand the answer, right? Or also make it reason out the answer instead of just answering directly. It starts thinking like a human being and adds reasoning to its answer. The second would be maybe to ask Gemini to answer only when it finds relevant text. Here I'm using sort of uh, a prompt which says, if there's no data that can help you answer the question, respond with, I do not have this information. Now, this becomes useful when you're trying to mitigate hallucinations or verbose responses with a lot of data which is not relevant. Again, you can specifically prompt Gemini to read through the documents, read through the context, tell it that, go through the data above or in the prompt to sort of answer your question. So these are just ways of sort of instructing the LLM. Think of it like teaching anyone to do a task, right? The more instructions you give it, the more process oriented inputs you give it, it will perform better. So that's the idea we have when we are looking at prompt guidelines. Now, quick recap before we jump into prompting techniques. Simplify your instructions, keep them clear and specific, limit your preamble to 2 or 3 sentences, try to limit your examples to 1 or 2 or 3 at max if possible. Start with a temperature of 0 0.5 and then sort of experiment with it. Avoid repeating instructions in your prompt. For long context, we've seen that adding the instruction to the end of the prompt helps. Using XML or Markdown to sort of structure your prompt helps separate the instructions from the documents being used or the examples. And also sort of experiment with trigger words, right? Which was basically priming Gemini. Using words like you specialize in, your task is, your goal is, return in the format, refrain from. These are just sort of trigger words which tune the way your model is behaving or your model thinks about responding, right? So these work. We'll quickly cover a few prompting techniques before we jump into Imagine. So first would be few shot prompting. We've already discussed this. The idea is basically to give an example along with your prompt in terms of how the output looks like. This really helps the model understand what the task is in hand. The second would be chain of thought reasoning. Now, all of these are complex concepts on their own, but maybe take note of these points and go back and read up on these papers, right? Or these concepts, because they really come into use when you're looking at complex use cases. So, chain of thought reasoning would be basically when you're giving the example, I'm not just directly giving the example, but I'm also giving it a thought process, right? For example, when you look at this model input, I'm saying that I'm giving this example, right, which is Roger has 5 tennis balls. He buys 2 more cans of tennis balls. Each can has 3 balls. How many tennis balls does he have? Here I'm giving a reasoning saying that Roger started with 5 balls, 2 cans and 3 balls means 6 extra balls. Add them up, the answer is 11. Now, when I ask another math question, is going to try to use that same sort of thought process to answer. Now, this is different from just simply giving examples, because now we're also teaching it how to think, right? How to frame its thoughts, how to reason and come at an answer. Picking up on chain of thought, we have another prompting technique called React, which is short for reasoning and action. Now it combines chain of thought and tool usage, right? So when I say tool usage, it means that yes, I'm reasoning and then I act upon that reasoning, right? Let me jump to the example to make it clear. If the question is how many times has the person who climbed Everest been on top, my first thought would be that you need to find out who climbed the mountain first. So that's your action. Maybe you make a call to an API. I mean, for this example, it doesn't really make sense, but let's say you're asking something on your data, right, which needs twofold instructions or sort of a process to be followed. So we give it a thought and then we sort of guide it to act upon that thought, right, which could be a search, which could be a backend function being triggered or performing a certain task, right? So React helps you basically chain together chain of thought and also interact with external systems and take action on those external systems, right? This sort of giving this thought process to the LLMs help them perform better, again, because they start thinking more like humans and behaving more like humans. The third technique is quite popular. It's retrieval augmented generation. Now, RAG basically is an AI framework which combines the strengths of traditional information retrieval, which is your databases, with the capabilities of large language models, right? So the idea is how can I combine knowledge from my external data sources or my uh, databases or you know documents which I have internally or any sort of external data source. How do I use that information and combine it with my own large language model knowledge, right? To come up with the most accurate, up to date, relevant information. So what we're doing here is, let's say I get a query from the user. Based on the query, it goes to my retrieval system and collects all the information which will be necessary to answer this question, right? So that's the retrieval bit. Now that I've got this relevant information, maybe it'll be better explained with an example. Let's say I'm building a HR bot, right? And the HR bot is basically to answer policy related questions for employees. Now, let's say someone asks what is the policy around holidays for travel. Now, you could have a document which is of 100 pages, right, but your travel holiday policy could be just 1 page out of that. So does it make sense for me to plug in the entire document? Of course not. So when I'm querying it, what I will do now is I will just extract the paragraphs or the page which is relevant to my question and plug that into my prompt, right? So now we have our prompt itself. We have our retrieved information which is augmented or added into our prompt, and then we're using that to generate our answer. So that's where the three sort of pieces come together. We retrieve the information, we augment it into our prompt, and then we ask the LLM to generate the answer based on all of this information and all of these instructions. A quick scan would sort of guide you to a lot more documents we have on prompting and a lot more examples we have on how prompts look like. Uh, Now we're going to jump into image generation using Imagen. Now, uh, again, with this part of the session, we will focus more on how do we look at image generation, how do we prompt for image generation, and how do we use Imagen for the same, right? So Imagen is Vertex AI's is part of Vertex AI, and it's Google's large model for image generation and image editing. With that, high quality images being generated at an enterprise scale, right? Now, our latest model is Imagen 3, and it's basically catering to three customer needs, which we sort of saw our customers have, which was improving the quality. Now, when I say improving quality, it means adhering better to the prompt itself, uh, being able to render text in your generated images, being able to have more photorealistic and versatile outputs, and also uh, better understanding of how a prompt can work, right? For Imagen. So it still has some of the best practices we use in Gemini. Secondly, it is the speed of generation, which leads to a better end user experience. So Imagen 3 is a lot more faster than our older models. It's able to generate images nearly in half the time as other competitor models as well, with comparable quality. Then we have the idea of still thinking about an enterprise scale, right? So higher safeguards, thinking about protection and risk mitigation. How do I look at digital watermarking? How do I look at safeguards in terms of responsible AI, right? So all of these are sort of different requirements our customers have, and we've sort of incorporated that into Imagen 3. Now, just some examples of customers using Imagen 3 already. We have Shutterstock, which is using Imagen to help their users generate custom AI images. Now, image data is sort of the bread and butter of what Shutterstock does, and they have been able to sort of really increase the amount of AI generated images which are getting created using our models, and they are able to execute faster on their ideas without really sacrificing on quality. Then we have Puma, which is more on the consumer end. They are using Imagen to make personalized product images, using it for online visuals, marketing campaigns, and sort of just elevating that visual storytelling, right? So these are just some examples of the use cases which get opened up with image generation, right? So with image generation, we're looking at use cases like logo and brand creation, product editing. Let's say I have a product and I want to place it in a living room, right? If I'm trying to sell a sofa and I want my advertisement to look a lot more attractive, I sort of place it in an attractive living room which is modern and matches the vibe of my sofa which I'm trying to sell. So we're able to sort of place our products where we want, edit the images more, and sort of create these uh, visual content, right? Again, Imagen 3 has gotten better with rendering accurate text on images directly through the prompts. You don't have to do two layers, right? Of sort of superimposing your text on the image. Initially, models tended to have a challenge with generating text along with the images. Now that's become a lot better. uh, a few more use cases in terms of what Imagen opens up, being thumbnail creation, storyboard images, creating avatars. All of these are sort of opened up with Imagen, right? And it goes beyond this, of course. So Imagen sort of caters to three verticals, one being image generation, which again is optimized for latency and quality goals. Then you have image editing. You can edit generated images or your existing images. And then we have customization, right? How do I augment and tune my images using generative AI? This is, of course, something in the roadmap, but the idea is to give you a picture of what Imagen is capable of doing and what is in our roadmap as well. Moving on to sort of, again, prompting, right? How do I think about prompting for image generation? Now, the idea behind writing prompts for generating images is basically being able to think like a photographer. We have seen that works very well when you're interacting with Imagen. So uh, the idea would be to craft your Imagen prompts with a photographer's eye. Think about basic camera. Now again, no, you don't have to be a photographer, but the idea is to start thinking like one, right? Think about your camera basics. What sort of lens, what sort of camera type is being used, and I'll show you some examples where it'll be a lot clearer what I mean by this. Think about the lighting controls, right? How do I, in my prompt, define how I want my shadows to look like? How do I want my highlights? How do I want my colors? Now lighting plays a big role in sort of defining the mood of the picture, and that would depend on your use case, but it really helps to be able to control that, right? Then we have image composition, thinking about how do I arrange and organize the elements of my image to create a visually appealing and meaningful image. So here again, the more clarity you give in the prompt as to what elements you are looking out for, the better it will perform. Now, to be honest, the next slides are just a bunch of prompts, right? We're going to look at a lot of images, look at the prompts I have used to create those images, and sort of get a sense of how do we prompt to create really, really attractive visuals, right? Or visuals which pertain to your use case. Again, it's really, really important to think about the color palette, because that will really specify the mood and the atmosphere you're trying to create with your images. So all in all, the idea is to basically think like a photographer, right? uh, let's sort of understand the components of a prompt, even in terms of image generation. Again, it helps to have a structure, it helps to follow a certain structure. If you look at the example I have shared, uh, we have sort of tackled this structure, right? So if you see the image, I have first defined a image style, which is a close-up photo. Then we have defined a subject, which is a woman in her 20s. Uh, and again, you can see that I haven't actually given a very verbose prompt. I'm just using phrases. That's more than enough. It works well, it works quite well. The idea is to just cover your requirements, right? So the photography style could be street photography. The camera is Canon now. Of course, you need not always include all of these. But it will affect the way your results are generated, right? So you can completely skip this, it's not essential, but adding these does change the way your output is actually generated. Now I'm using keywords like it should be a movie still. I'm creating an ambience saying that, I want muted orange warm tones, and you can see all of that getting reflected in the image which is getting created. So image styles or lens styles would be, macro photography, wide angle shots, close up photos, camera angles. Take, let's say you're trying to create an image of a city, right? A city. So if you say I want the top view, a view from above, right? A view which would be seen from an aeroplane, not an aeroplane probably, but like a flying object, right? So when you're giving it that angle, it's because when I just say generate an image of New York City, it's going to give me something random. But when I give it an angle it needs to think about, it's going to perform better. Then obviously defining your subject is very important. This could mean one subject or multiple subjects, along with the description of the subject, right? Like uh, a beautiful woman with huge curly hair, wearing sunglasses with mirrored lenses, uh, a figurine of a boy, a 3D image of a house. Defining your subject becomes very important because that becomes the core or the centerpiece of the image which you're creating. Adding an ambience becomes important, which is natural light, sunlight, sunset, muted tones, neon colors. We'll talk more about all of these details. And then using keywords, right, like minimalistic, or vintage, or futuristic. All of these sort of help, and we'll get into the details of this. So first, we are talking about how do we make Imagine get that quality which we were talking about, right? How are we able to better uh, utilize Imagine's capabilities? Now Imagine is able to better compose its images. It can understand color and tonality a lot more. You can direct the resolution of the image, the focus and the sharpness. So let's look at the examples. Let me look at the first one, which is a close up of a warm and fuzzy colorful poncho laying on top of a chair on a bright sunny day, right? So you can see all of these components being captured. You can see light elements sort of there. You can see that warm, fuzzy poncho being sort of generated. Here we can see an old woman with a super modern and cool attire. She's holding a high-tech cell phone. So the more I give details on what elements I want in my image, the more it's able to sort of define that picture, right? I'm also calling out a happy atmosphere. I'm saying that I want high resolution, hyper realistic. So the idea is the more context you give and the more composition details you give, the better it'll perform. With the third one, we're talking about a DSLR style shot, right? So now we're talking about a camera type with a polarizing filter. Now, if you have a sense of how you want it to look like, maybe you are using this for product image generation, right? There you have a team maybe which understands how your end product needs to look like. You can actually describe that, and that will instantly improve your model performance, right? uh, Next we are talking about Imagine being able to understand your prompts a lot better, which means that it is able to even do text rendering better, pick up all components, right? A card being generated which says congratulations new grad. So you can see now that the text is very easily and cleanly getting rendered in all of these outputs. It's also performing a lot better when we're thinking about the composition or understanding specific requirements. This is an example of two unnamed competitors, and then Imagine sort of uh, responding to the same prompt, right? So when I say a close-up image of four pair of hands, this image you can see really understands that requirement very cleanly. It's very clearly showing four pair of hands on a table, nothing more, nothing less, and it's adhering to the prompt very, very well, right? And no sort of ambiguity is remaining. And we have seen that with Imagine 3, we are able to reach that better quality in terms of understanding our prompts. While we're looking at these slides, I want you to keep noticing how these prompts have been written. We won't go over each and every prompt, but the idea is to pick up on these keywords which have been used, right? These are again using all of the best practices for image generation. Imagine is capable of handling a lot more versatility in terms of the kind of images it's able to create. This means a lot more artistic expression. You can use it for marketing materials, educational content, scientific visualization. It's able to cater to a lot of needs. And now you are able to use one versatile AI model to replace the need of multiple specialized models, right? Because it's able to do that versatile set of tasks based on different prompts, different styles, and sort of making it more future proof, right? Because later you don't really have to change your tech or the background models you're using based on your requirement. That it makes it a little more future proof, right? So uh, let's look at this, right? We are talking about it being able to cater to a large range of formats or styles, where I'm talking about different sort of type of images. Here I'm talking about an oil painting in the Dutch golden age. It showcases a bouquet of flowers. I've also sort of called out that the blossoms are in full bloom, and you can see all of those components getting picked up, right? Now, how do I change the tonality of the image? I have called it out to be a Dutch golden age style. It's an oil painting. Here I'm sort of saying that, make it next to a window with sunlight streaming in, right? So it's really able to capture my exact requirement because I'm able to define my prompt, right? At the end of the day, LLM will, sorry, the large model will only perform as well as you're able to prompt to it. And you can see that with these outputs, right? Here again, the same model with a completely different requirement, right? A single comic book panel of two people staring into the hill, meadow, bright sunny day. So you're able to see that comic like image getting generated. Here it's a Polaroid capture of a high school set of friends on the car bonnet in the late 90s, 60s, American flash photography. So uh, it's able to pick up these different. So these are the ways you sort of use keywords, use a setting of sorts. Here we've sort of set a close-up shot in a dimly lit jazz club. Now the image you're trying to generate necessarily doesn't actually generate the entire image of the jazz club, right? But giving that theme to it helps it give a tonality to the image, gives it a proper background, because we've sort of given instructions on how the saxophone player's face looks. It's contorted with concentration. So you're able to really control a variety or versatile set of tasks, right? And that's the idea we have when we are looking at prompting for image generation. Again, a few more examples of how text rendering can be done using Imagen. Now you open up a lot of use cases, which could be, stylized greeting cards, banners, posters, advertising, uh, creation of decks. All of that sort of opens up when we are able to tackle text rendering, right? Moving on to actually some examples of prompting itself. Now, look at the two images, and it's very clear that the first image is a lot more appealing, right? And the idea I want you to take is keep your prompt simple. You can see that in the first prompt, I've said that a close up image of a beautiful puppy with rainbow fur, street photography, Canon, movie still, muted gold warm tones, sun rays. Now, with image generation, we have seen that keeping the prompts short and focused produces better results. The model can get confused with longer, elaborate prompts. Using shorter sentences and keywords separated with commas works very well, opposed to longer natural language descriptive prompts. Uh, Now, if you feel the need, a lot of times what we have also seen work very well is, let's say you have a lot of ideas, right? And you're typing down a lot of your ideas and it's very verbose. You can actually use Gemini to create an image prompt from your ideas and feed that into Imagine, right? That does turn out to work out very well. So you can also use LLMs to actually help you with prompt engineering or refine your prompts. That's a handy trick which you can use. But with this example, you get a sense that the longer the prompt, which you can see in the second prompt, the more unnatural or unrealistic the image is. The photography quality is poor because we've not really described what sort of image we're trying to create, right? So the more you think like a photographer, or the more you think about keywords which are essential to the actual image you're trying to create, the better your output is going to be. Going into a couple more tweaks we have, where we look at camera types and image styles. I don't want to get into the details of this, but we have noticed that experimenting with different camera types changes the depth of field and the way the image is created. For example, for human portraits, a personal favorite is, take using the term, photograph taken with DSLR camera, or a photograph taken with a Canon camera, because these are well reputed for being good with human portraits, right? So the idea is use your real world understanding of image composition, image uh, photography, all of that to sort of define your prompt, right? Again, the same goes with the image styles, right? Am I looking at a fashion shot, an editorial shot, maybe 3D rendering, maybe black and white pencil drawing? These are different image styles, and you will see how this affects the actual performance of the model or the output of the model, right? So let's say you look at street photography, for example. The image would be a lot more natural, a lot higher quality, it would be more candid. But if you use the word fashion photography instead, right, you would see sharper images which are more catered to an editorial kind of shot, right? So you could see the difference between a simple prompt where the only change I've done is define the photography style, and there's a big difference between the output actually getting generated. So these are sort of some tips and tricks to keep in mind. Next would be really to experiment with colors. The idea is to basically play around with color palettes, understand how that impacts your mood and emotional impact of the image, making the image style more consistent to your brand or your use case. For example, when you use words like warm, golden palette, it can create or infuse a very homely, inviting sort of image which gets generated. Other examples of color palettes could be bright light, dim ambient lighting, neon lights, gradient colors, sparkling sunlight. All of these are sort of different ways of changing the way the prompt creates these images, right? And you can see the difference between the tonality of each of these images. For example, the third one, right? It's quite different from the others. Film still of a man and woman sitting in a field of yellow flowers. One is a redhead. It's an Eden garden, daffodils sparkling in sunlight. Now, the tone of this image is very, very different from the second one, right? Which is light red and azure uh, photograph taken in a DSLR, a woman sitting in a car with rain and street photography. It's neon lights, purple, blue, cold tones, dim ambient lighting. So you can see the difference between these two sort of outputs, right? And same goes with the other two as well. So the idea is really to experiment with colors. It is really important also to really get your creative juices flowing. A great way to test a model is requesting it to create something novel, right? Which is not likely found in the data set. I've discovered that Imagen really excels at generating surreal interiors. So I've sort of given prompts like photo of a surreal room with everything made of cactus, or the third one, right, which is photo of a surreal room with everything made from rose flowers, or duotone pink and red colors. Now, it's uh, able to create completely different images. And it's fascinating how just a few word changes, you will notice it across the prompts. It's almost the same prompt, a photo of a surreal room with everything made of, change the last part, right? I've just changed a small component, and you can see how different each and every result is. And that is really fascinating. And that shows how important prompting is to your output, and how versatile your output could be based on the way you prompt, right? Uh, Next, again, we're talking about getting those creative juices flowing. Creating something novel, something it's not trained on, is also very doable, and we have seen Imagine perform well. So that's sort of the end of the prompt tuning techniques, which I wanted to discuss. A few more uh, topics, and then maybe we can jump into Q&A. But the idea from the previous section, which I want you to take, is think about these things, right? In terms of what is the style of photography you want, what is the angle of the shot you're trying to create. Is it a animated like shot? Is it a Pixar movie like shot? Are you creating something rustic? What sort of ambience are you trying to create, right? All of these components become very essential when you're actually creating your prompt, and create using that to generate images. Moving on to some more capabilities now. Uh, Imagine is able to create 4 images in under 4 seconds. It's really improved the user experience, and it helps you create real-time applications, and also increases productivity, because you are able to generate images a whole lot faster. uh, and this increases your rapid prototyping and iteration stage by 40% compared to our older models. um, we are also keying and doubling down on safety and responsibility. So you have the capability of actually allowing customers to watermark and verify their AI generated images at pixel level without any degradation on image quality. This allows for better attribution, branding, tracking, and monitoring. So um, you are able to have that safety and protection with your digital watermark. We are also giving you the capability of adding safety filters, just like Gemini did, where you are able to safeguard and ensure that your applications are being used ethically. We have some filters around, face generation of images of children. Right now, this is a very protected area. We do not want our products to be used in the wrong way, and that's why we have these safety filters in, where you can control the kind of images that are getting generated by a model, right? And keep that safety check in place. Lastly, two more sort of features is editing and customization. We'll cover this in brief. but we are also able to do image editing with Imagen, and these are mask based editing. So basically what this means is it lets you specify a target area to apply your edits to. Now, the method of editing could be based on your requirement. There's in painting, which is basically inserting or removing something from inside your image, and you use your masked area to sort of add or remove image content. In the first one, we've sort of removed that, we've added the plant, right, to that image and that area. In the second one, we've sort of used in painting to remove the third pot or the vase, right? So we're able to do that sort of editing. Then there's out painting, which is basically expanding the content of the image to a larger area or a different dimension. So we sort of expand the room view, right? Sometimes you want to actually just change the image to look more appealing or more realistic, and you want to sort of extend the content, right, or expand on the content or create new content. So that's what you can do with outpainting. Then we have product image editing, which is basically using uh, automatic product or object segmentation to maintain the content while modifying the background or the setting of the image, right? Along with this, you also have the option of mask-free editing, which lets you edit an image just using prompt. You don't have to actually define a certain area which you want to edit. This could be done simply using prompts. So if I have a simple reference hand-drawn image, I can actually use a text prompt to create different images using it, right? And I can define the style. These are very simple examples, but the idea is using natural language prompts to actually change your image output. Another sort of feature which is going to be coming up is product customization. How do I use my product reference images? Now, customization is going to be a lot more diverse than this. This is just one example, but let's say I have a product in place and I have reference images. How do I use that reference image to create more content out of it, right? The first one, I say that, use my reference images to make a robot with a victory sign, or uh, use my reference image to make a robot with the jade color making a heart shape. So now it's using your reference image and actually creating other images, right? So this becomes very important when we're looking at brand guidelines or other sort of boundaries you want to draw in terms of how your image is getting generated. So yeah, that's all I had for today. Thank you, and maybe I will get back to understand if there are any questions on the screen. I think I can see one question in place. So the question is by Ashish, which is, can Imagine 3 API generate images in custom resolutions? So currently, Ashish, I will just go back a couple of slides. We have a certain set of aspect ratios we cater to. So anything beyond that, you will have to sort of do some custom editing or tuning around it. So you'll have to pick it up in that way. And in terms of what is the typical approval time after submitting the Google form, the idea would be if you are directly connecting with a sales team person, then we can get that sorted out for you very quickly. But if you are doing it directly through our trusted tester program, it could take up to 2 weeks. We've seen a typical time of around 2 weeks, and maybe that is an approximation, but it really depends, right? So you could say an approx of 2 weeks to get your access. Um Questions. How can we access Imagine 3? Is an API available for consumption? Yes. So you can either try out Imagine 3 using the console itself, which is the Google Cloud Console. Under Vertex AI, you will find a section for vision, and that will have Imagine capabilities in it, and you can test it out there. And once you are happy with the results, we have APIs, we have SDKs for Python, for Node, which allow you to interact with Imagine. And maybe that will help you out. This was a question by Avhajit. And then there are a few more questions. Can we use our images and edit them as per our requirement? Yes. So with Imagen, you can edit both Imagen generated images or your existing images. So you can actually use your own images also and sort of tweak or tune them based on your requirement. So that can be done. Um, okay, a question by Pranav. Sanskriti, you use the tag constraint. Are there more tags similar to this one? Because it will be helpful to fine tune. So yeah, there are some commonly used tags which help. There's context, there's output restriction, output format, input data. These are sort of commonly used tags. Now tags also sometimes are specific to your use case. Let's say I am building a prompt for auditing calls, right? So there I would maybe have a tag which says call audio, and that call audio would just have the media file, right? So there are two ways you look at tags. One would be custom tags for your use case, and one would be tags which work well across use cases, right? Something like constraint, instructions, task, persona, all of these work across sort of use cases. I think we're on top of time now. I hope this session was useful, and thank you for your time.